We have a very challenging budget year ahead. And so our goal tonight, Liam and I are going to do this together, is to kind of give a sense of our current reality, what we're looking at next year, and just some process in terms of how we look at tackling the challenge. So Liam will start, and then I'll take it from there.
Thanks, David. This is really kind of our first really public update to you folks, and this is going to be a challenge, I think, for all of us to hear. And we wanted to kind of set the context of what we're looking at and kind of explaining. So, Stephen, if you can advance. So, really, kind of our budget coming into FY22, which is our current year right now. We really wanted to make sure we were providing a strong academic and social emotional support to our students given the impact of the pandemic. We've talked about that quite frequently, and that's certainly something that I think we're proud of and that we wanted to try and do. And we certainly wanted to keep class sizes reasonable for a variety of reasons. The budget was really developed with very little cushion in it. And in fact, we've been relying on surpluses these last couple of years. So for the last 3 years, we've needed between $1 and $3.5 million in addition to our budget. Those were assumptions we made as part of the budget process. And again, that's part of that circuit breaker in terms of offsetting. So those are aggressive assumptions we've needed to hit. We've also made some assumptions on attrition and needing to hit certain attrition thresholds to make our budget work. So it's been an aggressive period for us over the last couple of years. And we also finally knew that our contractual obligations would be challenging to meet. So the budget reality for us, cost increases and declines in specific revenue, it's been difficult for us in terms of projecting, as what I just talked about in this FY22. It's very difficult for us right now to project any surplus going into FY23. So the problem when we're not having a surplus and we've been relying on between $1 and $3 million to cushion our budget, that means we need to basically find that money, and basically means we have a gap right out of the gate, relying on that one-time funding to support ourselves. Why have we had that? And we've talked about this. We've had an unexpected increase in the number of health insurance plans. We've had an increase in substitute costs. We've had a decline in school building rent revenue, and then certainly those COVID-related expenses. So those are kind of some of the major drivers of why we're not projecting to have any real meaningful carry forward going into next year. What have we done? What action steps have we taken? I think you know this. In January, we've instituted an essential purchasing freeze, and I think that's also helped us and why we think some of the tide has turned a little bit. We're projecting a small balance right now. We do think we're still going to likely need some ESSER 3 funding at the end of the year to balance. We'll report on that. We're going to look at that very closely, and we want to be really cautious with how we use that money. The plan had been to spread that out over 3 years with approximately about $1.1 million each year. But given these expenses this year, it certainly would be allowable, given particularly these COVID expenses, to use some of our ESSER 3 for that funding. As we think about planning for FY23, kind of our pressures and our cost drivers. So again, no budgetary surplus going into FY23. We have increased contractual salary expenses. Will be our third and final year of our contract. We certainly need to make up and cover the expenses of those employees that have been taking health insurance plans. We are assuming a 4% health insurance rate increase on our plans that we have right now. Our transportation bids have come in. That we were projecting almost a 20%. The good news is 20% increase. The good news is they're not 20%. They're between 8 and 9%, and that's for both our regular and special education contract increases. So instead of almost $1 million increase, it's approximately $500,000 increase for our combined for special education and our regular education transportation. And then David's going to talk a little bit about our needs for additional in-district special education programs and staff to support greater student programming needs that we're looking at FY23.
I'll take that right now, Lee. And why don't I just jump in and say that, so we, at a number of levels, have in-district special education programs. And at the elementary level, for example, our STRIDE programs at Cabot and Zervis are full. And they've grown significantly in the last several years. and we need to add a third school, and that's involves significant staffing. We also need a program for students with low incidence disabilities. We also need some programming at the high school for some successful in-district middle school programs. And we've worked closely with our special education team and looking at numbers and analysis, and we can't hold off any longer in terms of adding. We have a responsibility and an obligation to add in-district programming, and obviously that comes with staff. It's an important part of our mission and important work. We'll have much more information, of course, in the budget book and presentations about the special education needs.
So folks, here's our slide. So this is basically a snapshot of where we are. Now, again, keep in mind, we're not yet totally finalized, so these numbers could slightly change on our end. We're showing basically $233 million in salaries and benefits going in FY23, approximately $33 million for expenses. I think David's going to talk a little bit more about this as well, but those salaries and benefits, our personnel costs, are now 88% of our budget. In 2017, sorry, David, I don't mean to steal you. Yeah, in 2017, those were approximately 86% of our costs. So over the last couple of years, basically, our salary and benefit costs have basically eaten into any basically expense line items that we've had and have grown. We've got, as David just talked about, this new and expanded special education in-district programming. It's fantastic programming, but there's a cost to it. So that's nearly $1.2 million of anticipated new positions. So in terms of what we're going to just call a level service, and that's inclusive of this new special education programming, and that also includes some enrollment declines, is essentially $267 million. The city allocation right now is an increase of $8.9 million. So again, that's a significant amount of money, which is $262 million. However, that leaves us with a $5.2 million budget gap. That's made up of the $4 million, basically kind of, I'm going to call it our level service budget, plus this additional $1.2 million in new special education programs. So that is right now our current gap that we're looking at. And we're going to talk about next steps here.
All right, so I'll take it from here. Thanks, Liam. So as Liam said, personnel is now 88% of our budget. And part of that is also due to add to what Liam said, is that we have certainly, when we've had tight budget years, reduced our non-personnel expenses. I mean, we certainly worked really hard, as we always do. That's where we are, but 88% personnel, it's really hard to go much lower than 12%. So our reductions, we have to submit a balanced budget, will be primarily personnel. And I should highlight our specific staffing reductions have not been finalized. The current range is between 50 and 60, in addition to the 12 to 14 staff reductions due to declining enrollment. The reason there's a range is it all depends on what kind of positions those are. The lower paid positions, obviously the number goes higher. And so that's why there's some variation. If we change the formula in terms of what we reduce, the numbers could shift one way or the other. But this is our best projection right now. And also the 12 to 14 staff reductions due to declining enrollment, that's primarily at the elementary level. That's still challenging to achieve, because if we lose, a few hundred students spread out among 260 classrooms, we can't always consolidate classrooms. It all depends on where the enrollment drop is, particularly in smaller elementary schools. That becomes a challenge. But that is our goal, the 12 to 14 primarily, but not totally at elementary. So considerations, when making reductions, we certainly look at our system-wide goals, and we know, important discussions around which goals can continue and which goals must be paused. Those are important discussions to have. There's no way, when we're talking about reductions, whether you can keep all goals given staffing shifts. But certainly we always want to have goals that are important that address the needs of students. We have to ensure the health and safety of our staff and students. That becomes critical in putting together the budget. We have to maintain our ability to provide mandated services. We operate in a regulatory environment, and certainly most of what we have to do, they're either mandated or relates to class size or services. And lastly, we need our district operations to continue to function. For example, we have to have a payroll office. We have to have a human resources so people can get hired and get benefits. It's really important that we make sure that district operations, we need a transportation department, that our district operations can continue to function. Certainly, we look at all departments, but that has to be a key piece as well.